and welcome to Castle of Horror, the show dedicated to horror movies and awesomeness. This week, we're discussing the 1973 film Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Dan Curtis, the creator of Dark Shadows. Bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have seen it. So warning, spoilers ahead. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, editor of this summer's Castle of Horror Anthology, Volume 1. We got a new one coming soon, and the upcoming Young Captain Nemo Quest for the Nautilus. With me from Austin is Tony Salvaggio, tech director at Rooster Teeth, lead singer and bassist of the band Deserts of Mars, and lead guitarist of the band Rise from Fire. Say hello, Tony.
Howdy.
Howdy. And also in Austin, writer of the long-running underground comic series Halloween Man. It is your time of year. Winner of the 2018 Best of Austin Award from the Austin Chronicle, Mr. Drew Edwards. Say hello.
And nominee for this
nominee for the 2019 awards. And if you're listening and you are able to go right now, go vote.
Yeah, because it is like the last 24-hour period.
Yeah, boy. Okay. So, yeah, if you're one of those people who pick up our show at like 4 o'clock in the morning as soon as it hits the wire, then vote. And finally, also in Denver, as always, color commentary from attorney Julia Guzman of Guzman Immigration of Denver. Say hello, Julia.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, Dracula. This movie has many titles. We'll call it Dracula, but a lot of us call it Dan Curtis's Dracula. Dracula is a 1973 British television film adaptation of Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, written by Richard Matheson, none other than Richard Matheson, directed by Dark Shadows creator Dan Curtis, with Jack Palance in the title role. It was the second collaboration for Curtis and Palance after the 1968 TV film The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I have not seen. All right. Let us get some opening thoughts. I'm so excited to talk about this one. I want to know what you guys, and if you don't dig this movie, I want to know about that. But let's talk about it. Let's start with Drew, then Julia, then Tony, and then we'll go into the topics. Drew, lay it on me. Opening thoughts. Dan Curtis's Dracula.
So I've seen this movie a lot of different times. This was kind of a critical reassessment for me because this was a movie that I keep reapproaching because I know a lot of people really like it, and to the point where I have conversations with people and they're like, Jack Palance is my definitive Dracula. He's my mind's eye Dracula. And I would just watch this movie and I would be even liking all the people that were involved. Uh-huh. I would never connect with this movie. Like, I've always felt like Jack Palance was horribly cast as Dracula, because I think of him as like a rugged cowboy actor with like none of the European haughtiness we want Count Dracula to have. Like nothing that we see in Lugosi or Lee. Like, he just never had that vibe to me. I really, in my initial viewings, I really disliked the guy playing Van Helsing. And I really thought it was kind of just a stodgier production. However, I have to stress this. When I reapproached it this time, I don't know what was different. And maybe it's just like, fourth time was a charm or whatever. I really, really liked this movie this time. I would go so far as to say I loved watching this time. I feel like I have done all of the cast a disservice, especially Jack Palance. I think he's actually quite terrific as Dracula. I don't know why it felt different this time. Maybe it's the very cleaned up version that's on Amazon Prime right now just suits it better. I would also say, even though this was a television movie and we just did Burnt Offerings a few weeks ago, I think this is the most cinematic movie Dan Curtis ever directed. There are some beautiful shots in this, and I also think this is one of the scariest versions of Jonathan Harker's captive in Dracula's castle. It really, even though it doesn't follow the novel verbatim, it really just hits on the creepiness of that part of the novel so well. It's still got some stuff I dislike about it. I hate the fact that they used German shepherds as wolves. I don't know why they didn't use huskies. They look much more like wolves. but we'll give that a pass because I think this is a wonderful gothic. Basically everything it delivers. Basically everything you could want out of a Dracula movie, and I don't know why all the other times I disliked it, but this time I just really enjoyed this.
Wow, that's high praise. Julia, I don't know if you've ever seen this version of Dracula before. What are your thoughts?
Well, I expected to feel how Drew said he felt the first time he watched it, which is that, I always think of Jack Palance as this cowboy as well, and just as kind of, I don't know, I just couldn't imagine him as Dracula. I was like, I just thought it would be so weird. And then, and at first I did have a hard time just kind of getting used to the idea, but then I totally got lost in him, and he was just so different. Like, I couldn't believe how different this character is than any of the characters I haven't seen a whole bunch of things, but I've certainly seen, like City Slickers and a couple other things.
Sure.
Like, I've just seen things where, he's just kind of acting like himself. And like what you think of him as anyway. But this is such a completely different character, just very strange and creepy. And so yeah, I very much felt, and it was really interesting watching some of the interview with him in the bonus materials where he talked about how he felt like he was getting so lost in this character that it scared him and he didn't want to do it again. He's never watched it himself.
Wow.
So yeah, that whole thing was very interesting. The rest of the movie is just kind of, to me, like many other films that we've watched about and that take place in this universe of, with the Oakley Court and the just the costumes and the women. I mean, and none of that really stood out to me, but I really felt like Jack Palance's performance stood out.
Wow, high praise. Tony, I know that we've talked about this movie before. I remember you and I were on a panel many years ago when we talked about favorite Draculas, and this one came up. But I don't know if you've actually seen this one before. So what were your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, I've seen it a few times. Not a ton, but what I like about this one is it is kind of a clip show version of the novel, and that's okay. What I love is it seems like, I don't know if Palance asked or what it is, but if you can find another Dracula where they went, so here's your motivation: utter contempt for humanity. Everything and everyone who is human is completely below you, and you should express that contempt whenever possible.
Except for Lucy.
Yeah, because, well, that's the lover thing we see
Yeah.
in many other ones. That I think this is probably kind of leads to the other Bram Stoker's Dracula
Yeah.
in the lover. But other than her, and the only reason he does that is because he feels like he has this connection.
Right.
Because his contempt is also like, he doesn't see her as a person. He sees her as a vessel for his previous love. She's not really human. She is just the reincarnation of a lover, his ex-wife who was killed.
Yeah.
I guess still his wife wasn't technically his ex. So his former wife who is deceased.
His late wife, yes.
Yeah, late wife. Sorry. I don't know why that escaped.
No, that was good.
That's cool.
But we'll get into it, but he karate chops a guy. He rips up a mausoleum. Anytime somebody's talking to him, he's human. He's just like, whatever. You said something, and I only hear the important parts.
Yes.
And it is in his face. Oh, when he's just dealing with people, and his contempt just all throughout it. He's he's a big physical person. So he just tears through everything. It's amazing. I that's why I like him, is because I can see where, I don't know, who's this cowboy guy? But if you want a Dracula who's just been around a long time and seen everything, he's seen it all. And he has no qualms in telling people things like, oh, so you're going to outwit me? Did you impale all these people? He doesn't use impale, but he basically, like, the number of times he's driven out the Turks is definitely one of those things like, I've seen the worst. You can't do worse than that. And I did it every time. People came and killed my wife. Guess what? I'm still here. Come on, humans. I'm gonna rip through all of your crap. Oh, it's amazing. But I like it. And they do pick and choose. Like I said, it is a little bit of a clip show of the book. But what it does do is is pretty awesome.
Wow, that was I just have to reiterate what you said about Palance, that I love his look of just, he really does look as though he wants to just punch people all the time.
Well, I
But
kind
then
of
you
feel
can
like
also rip them in two.
if I kind of feel like that's like also the actor maybe feels that way. a little
Palance,
bit.
yes, it's
He might.
At
he's-
least,
Oh, man.
if not, then he really sold that, because I feel that about him just kind of in general.
I used to
but Tony,
call him the Mack truck Dracula. This is the Dracula who's like, he is 6'3", and he's big across the shoulder, and he looks like he's been punched a few times, and and he just looks, he's the only other actor who is as physically imposing as this guy is Christopher Lee, who is also a very large man, and very imposing, and they're pretty different.
And other than his kind of twisted romance, this is not, and maybe this is part of what Drew is reacting to. He's not a romantic vampire.
Yeah,
There is nothing. He wants to rip people in twain.
yeah.
It's
If
not
they're
that
not
I
as-
expected him to be romantic, because I don't really think Christopher Lee is romantic in a normal way. He's not. When I think of Dracula, I no matter what version of Dracula, I think of him being aristocratic.
Yeah.
And Jack Palance,
European,
doesn't necessarily say that. He plays gangsters and he plays cowboys.
Now, on a side note, and not to bring up an argument, but I mean, if you're going to go with that he is Vlad Dracula,
Yeah.
he is a man who did war a lot and impale people and do bad things to peasants, and so while aristocratic, not so out of the.
I want to hit on
character.
No, but he seems elegant. He seems elegant.
That's
Usually.
interesting. The concept here, and it's a concept of Dracula that has been played with a lot, is that of an alien to the country who is a different kind of nobleman, and that's why he would be sexually attractive. But this does not follow, like, this doesn't do the Badham movie, which only comes like 6 years after this movie. Completely flips it around, where he's basically in the drawing room with them and he's flirting with all the women and all that stuff. In this case, he's more like you're right. Lucy is a vessel for his deceased wife, and he's going to rip through this house to get her. Period.
Well, and that's a thing that Dan Curtis invents. Like, that is not. It may have
let's
been
talk
in other
about that.
films,
Sure.
but
Yeah.
this is it's the first time.
There's
that
two big inventions here. And I don't know which one is more interesting or obvious, but they're both huge. One, so Richard Matheson is doing the script, and we've come across Richard Matheson so many times on this show that he's like an old friend. He's like an unofficial part of the show, because he wrote Legend of Hell House. He's like all over the Twilight Zone. Matheson's everywhere, and he wrote this script, and Dan Curtis takes credit for it. So who knows if that's true? But what the big innovation? There are two big innovations. One that people are less aware of than the other. The first big innovation of Richard Matheson's script is the Reincarnation Plot. The idea that Dracula is in love with either Lucy or Mina, depending on the version that you're watching, because he thinks that she's a reincarnation of a lost love. That's Matheson. Maybe a little bit of Curtis, because he's like, hey, rip off something we did on Dark Shadows a couple of years ago. But basically it's Matheson, and it is so readily acceptable to people that that's the story, that it becomes.
People think that's in Stoker.
It just gets fused.
I've had arguments with people who are convinced that's in the book, and we see that rip off not just in Dracula movies, but I mean, hell, like Fright Night rips borrows whatever,
and
like
Blackula, and all these things that. I think it's just because the moment that it's like the cotton gin. The moment that was invented, it was so obvious to everyone that it just became a part of the folklore. It's like, oh yeah, the ancient vampire lord in love with the reincarnation, blah blah blah. It solves a major problem. I mean, let's give it to Richard Matheson for this. It solves a major problem with the novel, which is that, considering how everybody is moving back and forth between Eastern Europe and Central Europe and London, everybody sure does know one another a lot, and it makes a lot more sense if Dracula has a reason to head for the home of Lucy Westenra, or sorry, of Mina and Lucy. And in this one, it's Lucy that they follow a lot of the plot with the stuff that he does with Mina, where he like tries to make her my slave and help meet and all that other good stuff. But his love story thing is with Lucy. In the Coppola 1992 version, it's more like Lucy is kind of the I don't even know. She's an appetizer. He goes after Lucy and then goes after Mina because he's most in love with Mina. But it all starts here. That's amazing. I mean, that this particular television film is so important to Dracula lore.
When Drew was when Drew was talking though, I wanted that argument. You want to see it where people go, "Oh, it's in the novel," and then hear the Arrested Development. It was not.
That's like, hey, show me where. Show me where.
The narrator that follows you through your life and just looks at the camera and goes, "It is not."
It was not.
It is not. It is not. It was not.
Oh, but there's another one. This one blows my mind even more because I grew up, in the 70s and 80s. I grew up with this thing about how, hey, Dracula was a real guy and he's based on Vlad the Impaler. That also comes from here.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first movie that explicitly says that Dracula, the character, is literally the same human being, the same body, the same cells as was walking around as Vlad the Impaler back in the 15th century. And to do that, they have to sort of whitewash a lot of crap that Vlad the Impaler was all about. But having said that, this is the first one that does that. That blows my mind that it hadn't been done before.
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
I think the reason why people latch on to those two ideas is, as you're saying, they just seem so like obvious.
Right.
Like why wouldn't you do those things? And that's why I think it also gets to the point where people are, as I was saying, pinpoint positive that that's in the original novel, whereas like Stoker's actually very vague about who Dracula was when he was alive. I mean, I'm sure some of that stuff, like he might have been thinking about Vlad Tepes, but like, not in such a, point A to point B kind of way. But it works,
Yes.
I think it's neat to think that this movie monster at this point could have been a real person. And I think as a culture, it's because we want part of our fantasy world, even the scary part of our fantasy world, to possibly be real. Because if Dracula was real, what else is real? And it just opens up so many possibilities to people. So that's why I think that's an intriguing notion.
Well, and that's actually what Jack Palance talks about in the interview. Is he was intrigued by the idea that what if that something like that could be real? Like, what if this was real and this was a real world? And
what
that's
if Dracula
part of
were really immortal?
That's part of why he
goes off on a riff about that.
He got a little freaked out about playing the character because it just got too real for him.
There's a really super good book. So the first major book that Radu Florescu and Raymond McNally wrote, In Search of Dracula, and I don't know when that book originally came out. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in front of me. But I think it was like right at the beginning of the 70s. And then they had one from the 90s called Dracula, Prince of Many Faces. So they wrote all these histories of Vlad the Impaler. And it's fascinating stuff. But that came out, In Search of Dracula came out and immediately captivated people that there was a real guy. But actually, before all that history had been gathered together, obviously people in Romania are well aware of this prince, and to them, he's almost a sort of a magnificent bastard folk hero. He was a prince. He was known for his great cruelty, but he's also known as a great national hero. And it's also of interest that he is such a big. Dracula was really, really important to the Pope in his ongoing fight against the Ottoman Empire. The real problem of the real guy, and the reason it all gets cleaned up when you're going to make him into Jack Palance as a romantic figure, is the real guy is a very powerful military genius who nevertheless has a hard time holding on to his crown because he keeps losing his crown because his brother is also very skilled. And he keeps fighting with his brother back and forth for rule. And he's also, unfortunately, a major sexual sadist. And so the Pope has to go to a great deal of difficulty in rehabilitating the reputation of Dracula with all of the other kingdoms, so that everybody will give money to Dracula to keep fighting the Ottoman Turks. So it's if you can imagine, basically, if you gave Hannibal Lecter a country, and he was the one that you had to support.
Yeah,
well, it's funny you say Hannibal Lecter. I say Dr. Doom.
Yeah, there's something there. Tony, what were you going to say?
Well, I mean, Dr. Doom and pale people are set.
I think he would.
So you think he would also fix the peasant problem by setting them on fire?
I think he wouldn't have to because he has robots.
Oh, I got you. Well,
but continue your
To
thought.
be down with the peasants, though. Dr. Doom does. Anyway,
Doom is a man of the people. I hear what you're saying. Hell.
But yeah, no, that's probably apt though. When Jason was talking about it though, I kept envisioning other people who had to give money, going, "Really, that guy? Well, yeah, I mean, we needed a fight," and they're like, "But really, he's the impaler guy. That's the guy we give money to? Well, yeah, he's the one who gets results." I guess you're right. That's usually how that has to work, right?
It unfortunately, yeah. I mean, and one of the really interesting things about Dracula, and I don't mean to get off onto historical Dracula, but one of the most fascinating things to me about Dracula is that he and his brother were sold as what would be the word? They were basically captives to the Ottoman Turks when they were kids, in a way of keeping the peace. So Prince Dracula sends his two sons over to the Sultan and says, "Watch my two sons for a number of years." And it was that time spent in the Ottoman Empire that ends up causing a great rift between Dracula and his brother, because his brother, when he comes to power, is always very he still has loyalties to the Sultan that they grew up with, Sultan Mehmed, and at the same time Dracula himself is a big nationalist. And so these two brothers, both drawing on the same traumatic childhood that they shared, draw very different lessons from it, and spend all this time. Well, by the way, I ain't never seen this in a movie. Nobody has ever done any of this stuff. but
they sort of kind of do it with that one Dracula movie, but it didn't really gel.
Which one are we thinking of?
The most recent one that I.
Oh, yeah, the new one, the Universal one.
Yeah,
Dracula Untold or something. I didn't see it.
Yeah, Dracula Untold.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's sort of kind of, some of it's there, but it's not like what you expect. It's
well,
not
I mean, also, how the heck are you going to do it? To be honest with you, this is where we're getting. Remember that Stoker didn't have any of this stuff. He had just a little bit in some travel, and that the most he has, he turns into that wonderful monologue from Dracula that Tony mentioned, which is here and is also in the Count Dracula movie from.
And 1972. It's in the Coppola one as well.
Yeah, you're talking about. Again and again he came
he's talking
across the bloody battlefield. No
devil or witch, that's and such. It's I think the Stoker, this, the historical Dracula was more like flavoring. It was like putting Parmesan cheese into a lasagna. It wasn't meant to be the main part of the dish. It was just something to give it like a little, I hate to say this because I was just railing against this, but it was grounding it in something. And but it wasn't meant to ever be the main thing.
I used to be so upset about this stuff when I was a kid. When I was in college, because I was like, well, that's not how the novel goes or whatever. And now I think it even, guys, all of us doing this show now for like 6 years or whatever it is, I've just changed my feeling about it. Now I kind of feel like, what are you going to bring to the table, and what are you flavoring it with? In Drew's words, it does make. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry, finish your.
No. I was okay. Well, what I was thinking was, imagine 500 years from now, we write a story and like Richard Nixon is a returned devil prince or something, and you got to wonder like what pieces of the Nixon story would make it into it, and would he be like a romantic figure, and then there'd be dumbasses like me, 600 years from now going, well, Richard Nixon was actually a Quaker from Pennsylvania or California and whatever.
I would hope somebody better than Nixon would be none of that. Like at least Vlad and Radu are interesting, but
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I guess to poli-sci majors, maybe Nixon is interesting, but in general, not quite the same.
I guess you're right.
I
Jim
don't
Rachel
Jones.
Maddow, Rachel Maddow, Nixon, and Spiro
loves-
Agnew
she
are
loves
the
to
most
talk about
interesting.
Right.
Spiro
The,
Agnew. We should move on to the next thing, but I mean,
Oh yeah,
Spiro
that
Agnew
ties
plays a
into
part
this.
here. This movie was supposed to show in October of 1973, and it actually ended up not being played until January of 1974 because Spiro Agnew, the Vice President of the United States, resigned because he was extremely corrupt, and it all caught up to him. So the Vice President of the United States. For those of you listening and you're not in the United States, you have to understand this is super, super rare. But the Vice President of the United States literally resigned from office, and the president announced it on national television.
And then the president resigned from office after that.
Oh yeah, not to be outdone, the president
Yeah.
himself later resigned. That was a huge deal.
Good.
Gosh,
Scooby-Doo.
I wonder if that will ever be repeated, that specific scenario.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Guy could-
Well,
yeah.
oh.
Tony, did I interrupt you? I think
No.
I
I again, since we're all in different places, it's always hard to find those spots. But starting with what Drew was going off on, where the Harker parts are so much more terrifying. But I also really love how Dracula's castle isn't a decrepit kind of wasteland of a castle.
Yeah.
It's got cobwebs. It's a little outdated, but he still lives in kind of luxury.
Yeah.
He's not as weird. Like it makes sense. Like other ones, Harker comes in and everything's just kind of falling apart.
Yeah, it's a crypt
And-
essentially. Yeah.
And that is interesting because you realize, hey, there's something unnatural. But what's kind of cool about this one is, other than, he doesn't seem to have servants, so some things are more degenerated. When he's walking through the castle, it's in general not too shabby.
Yeah.
He's got some pride, He's doing what housekeeping he needs to do before he moves to Carfax.
This is a wonderful set. This is an actual castle, and that they're filming in Yugoslavia.
Well,
And-
the exterior.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Or is the interior a
It's actually
soundstage?
not. I'm sorry, it's not in Yugoslavia. The castle is in Croatia. His castle.
Oh, I apologize.
But I don't know. I think the interior is a soundstage. Yeah.
So it's it's all very brightly lit. And what's funny is we open with, just as almost all of these adaptations of Dracula, we open of the adventures of Jonathan Harker or Renfield in the 1931, who is a real estate man, attorney, whatever he is, who has come to Dracula's place because this is a world, and many times in this movie we're reminded this is a world before telephones. So Dracula has written to his solicitors in London and says, I want to buy a house in London. And so Harker goes all the way out there with pictures of houses to show Dracula, and Dracula is not messing around. I love the funniest thing is Dracula goes, oh yeah, hey, make yourself comfortable, sit down, I made you a big dinner. Harker sits down, and then like 8 seconds later, Dracula goes, did you bring the picture? Oh yeah. Well, Harker says, I got pictures of the houses, and Dracula goes, oh really? Show them to me now.
Well, even better is he can't eat.
Right.
So he just looks at the food like, why the hell did humans? They have to eat. And then he at his earliest convenience, as soon as he possibly can, because he has the amenities. Because what I love is he invites Harker in as if Harker, he's giving him the same amenities that you would a vampire.
Yes.
Right.
You may enter freely.
Uh-huh.
It's great because he still has this elevated sense of decorum in some
Yes.
ways.
But he says you may enter freely, but what was the second part? The second part was more
It's
interesting.
welcome to my house, enter freely and of your own will.
Yeah.
Um,
but it's the same. But so he offers him this dinner, and he makes all of the advances that you need to make because you're a guest in my house. But as soon as possible, he goes, "No, I've had you're here to do a job," and the meal is. They just leave. He doesn't even get he cuts into it. I think he might. I don't even know if he gets a bite in.
I don't think he gets a bite.
I mean, because it looks good, but the whole time, Palance is just glaring at this food. Like,
So, not related to any of that, but relating to this part of the movie, and how this movie influences other things.
Yeah.
So there's a particular, unlike a lot of other film Draculas, Jack Palance doesn't attempt to do much in the way of an accent. But what he does do, and I noticed until this time, is the way he says Dracula. He says this, and I had kind of given this to Gary Oldman that this was something that he had come up with, but he says Dracula.
Right.
And like I've always thought of Gary Oldman as kind of the composite Dracula anyway, because like everything from him is kind of like borrowed from a different Dracula. So like the one thing that I had given him was that weird ass way he says Dracula, and now like I don't know if it's just the sound was so much better on this version that I watched, but that weird ass way that Jack Palance, it's the only time he really tries to adopt a Transylvanian accent, whatever that would be. And I just was fascinated on discovering that.
Well, and Palance, it's important to think of like Palance before he was in the Air Force and before he was a fighter. He he's a first generation immigrant himself. He was born in the United States, but his parents were from Ukraine. So you have to imagine he grew up with a Ukrainian accent in his house all the time, you would have to imagine. And I have to think that he at least has some vision of how to like slip stuff into this, although he's not doing much. I mean, most of what he does is just really weird stuff with his breathing.
My thought about the accent and why maybe it comes out the way it does is maybe his thought is that Dracula has had so much time to master English,
Yes.
he wouldn't actually have much of an accent. He would.
Sure.
It would only be on Romanian words that there would be that kind of weird way you roll the R's and everything. But I thought that was neat. Like,
it's wonderful.
It's not quite Bela Lugosi, but it's different than Christopher Lee doesn't put on any kind of accent.
No, Christopher Lee does a whole other thing where Lee is like, I'm going to pretend until the last possible moment that not only am I like normal, I'm like a complete English gentleman. Even has some irony about
the
it.
other thing that that Jack Palance does is the roar. I don't know what sound effect that is, but it's this roar that he does every once in a while. I'm just like, wow, he sounds like like some kind of bear. I guess it is. It's just a really.
It's the various times when he's just really, really enraged. He just looks at the sky and just
and then it's the anguished roar when he's in grief. You know what? This is a very sympathetic character because you really do, even though okay, I'm going to say a couple of things real quick. You feel for him because of the pain. He's clearly grieving his late wife, and now he grieves Lucy when she gets killed, and then he grieves all of his precious dirt. And then he grieves all of his wives, and it's like he just has all this, and you kind of feel bad. Like you're like, I know you're a really bad dude, but you're really suffering. And so the other thing I'm going to say about that is I have found, and I'm kind of seeing this lesson over and over in my life, that people really hate to see other people suffer, even if the people really deserve it. So I think that's where a lot of the victim shaming comes from when you've got like a predator or whatever, because we're seeing the predator being currently persecuted or prosecuted, whichever, both things, we're seeing the predator currently being punished or being bullied like by other people or yelled at or whatever. And so that's what you're seeing, and your empathy goes to that person because right now they're feeling that pain, and the pain that was felt by the other person theoretically in the past, although they're probably still experiencing it as victim, that is easier for you to dismiss. You're like, well, that happened already, but this guy right this second is suffering, and I hate to see somebody suffer. And so I think that's part of where a lot of times when you have like a
that's really
judge
interesting.
going, when you have a judge going, well, this person's future is being ruined. I'm like, well, the victim's future was also ruined, but why doesn't that matter? It's like, well, because right now this person's right in front of me, and I feel bad for them unless I don't connect with them, in which case I don't, and I can throw them in the slammer or whatever, which is often
Isn't that
the case with
interesting?
racial, whatever. But anyway, that's a bunch of things that I've been thinking.
Wow,
So,
but
blah.
that's really, really good. I mean, it explains this complicated empathy that we have for Dracula, despite him being, as Tony points out, this guy is a kind of a snob isn't even the right word. It's impossible. He's so above humans and so dismissive of them that he doesn't have time for any of us, and yet we do. I actually sort of enjoy it. Go ahead,
They're
Tony.
more like sentient insects to him.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, exactly.
I could spray you all
Totally.
with some
Yeah,
form
we're
of raid.
we're a wasp nest. We're just annoying.
Getting back to this section where Harker is having his adventure in the Castle Dracula, and it's so funny how all the different parts of the Stoker novel always get kind of thrown up in the air and then rearranged for each of these versions, and we get to see how it plays differently. I love the Brides of Dracula here, and it's fun to think of this movie, like watch it back to back with Count Dracula, which was made in 1972. So it's probably these movies didn't influence one another at all because they're more or less contemporaneous, and it's fun to sort of watch how these scenes are done. When Curtis shows you the three brides, other than the fact that I would have loved kind of a grainier, darker print of this than the one on Prime because it feels too bright, and that's probably just a problem of it being a television movie. I like that these vampire brides are like crazy fast. They basically, the moment they decide, oh, you know what, I'm going to bite you now, they just start running, and it's it's so alarming because Harker he goes, oh, where'd you ladies come from? And then they're like, fantastic. All the vampires
only a
are
little
like
bit
this.
of peril.
Yeah. What was that from?
They truly are scary, as opposed to like there's some where it's much more sensual and you're kind of led to believe, well, maybe maybe not so bad. This one, again, like Palance, these brides are, if he doesn't come in, they're probably just gonna rip this dude to shreds.
Yes.
Like it's not nearly as sensual as a lot of movies after this.
Well, the funny thing is, it's not as sensual as the book either. This is the place where Bram Stoker was shooting for erotica, because the vampire brides said, I don't have the text in front of me, but if I recall, the line was, there are kisses for us all. And, and Harker is more or less seduced by them, and then they're going to bite him. And then Dracula comes in and says something similar to what he says in the movie. In this movie, he doesn't use the great line, which is, back, this man belongs to me. He says something else, but
again, with Palance, he bursts in and is like, oh, how many times do I have to, always with the getting, I can fight people here, and you women, you do this every time. Oh.
Yes.
And he's so frustrated and annoyed with the world at any given time. Oh, yet again, the three of you, just time out. Just go to your coffins. Oh, I can't stand it. And he's just so angry about it. And they're like, oh, fine. Never let us do this.
In the 72 version, Dracula points at the corner because he has, you get the impression that it's like he's gone shopping, he's come back, and he finds them breaking the rules, and in the 72 version, he points at the corner and he brought a baby. So they set upon the baby instead, and he saves
Well,
Harker.
that's in the book.
It is in the book. Yes, it is totally in the book, and it's in the 72 version, and it's in the 92 version. It's not in this version. I gotta say, probably
a lot
because
of Dracula stay away from the baby eating. I wonder why.
Oh, especially in a TV movie.
Yeah,
I think
for real.
probably baby eating is.
It might be like
what are they
one step
supposed
too far.
What are they supposed to do? I mean, like, of course they're going to eat the guy because they need to eat,
Yes.
Like, I kind of feel bad for them. He's like, you're not allowed to eat dinner. Only I am.
Julia is.
Well, I mean, he didn't let Harker do it either, so it seems to be his MO.
Yeah.
Everyone gets to eat. Wait, let's go. Oh, dessert. Oh, wait, let's go to the club. Like, dude, we went to dinner. You said dinner. No, we're going to the club or some business. We all have to go back to the office. Oh,
yes.
Stupid Dracula.
There's something else here, by the way, that I never noticed before. And maybe this was obvious to everybody else. But Dracula makes a big to-do when they're unpacking and he's looking at the pictures. And he goes, oh, beautiful picture. There's Lucy, how lovely. And your fiance, Mina. Lucy, how beautiful. And then later, Harker, once he's locked in, because Dracula goes, oh, by the way, stick around for a month. Dracula locks him in. Harker sneaks out. That's how he winds up in the wing of the Brides of Dracula, and they try to eat him. But it's also Dracula's apparently workspace because he's got like a lot of papers on this table and things. And he's got a newspaper article where he has already circled Lucy, which means that Dracula knew about Lucy
Ahead of time.
and maybe the whole time, certainly, and that may even be why he chose to write to Harker. Like this might be a Batman plot where he literally is like, who's closest to Lucy? These real estate guys. Well, who's the guy there? I guess it's this Harker. So I'm gonna write to Harker. But that's funny. That's weird. He's got a London Times there that he's already circled.
Wow.
I also
That is
like
interesting.
his who's that? And he tells him like, yeah, she's hot. Your fiance's good, I guess. Like I don't want to be rude. He has this whole thing where he's trying to be nice and not totally offend Harker. So he adds this extra. Oh, she's beautiful. Fine. Yeah, I can see she is just a peach. So her friend though, huh? It's so good.
That's funny, Tony.
So and then he leaves. Well, once he saves Harker from the vamp in this version, and all the different versions are different, right? But in this one, once he saves Harker from a fate worse than death, I suppose, he doesn't even hide that he's a vampire anymore. He's write your letters, and I'm going to lock you in, and that's it for you. And then he leaves.
And then he heads to Europe. Oh,
then he's gone.
The way, that shot, even though they don't show much of it, the shot where the pilot is tied to the mast of the Demeter is so horrific and beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that is what made me really like Dan Curtis stepped up his game, because we were just when we did Burnt Offerings, we talked about how unfortunately that movie, as good as it is very static at times. This has a lot of wonderful framing and a lot of wonderful camera work, and that shot that Tony just mentioned, that is especially with the part where they kind of pan in and see Dracula in his coffin on the beach, and that it's just gorgeous.
It is the closest probably to the end of Nosferatu. Those great shots. It's probably the closest to that of anything in the movie, and it's horrific in the way that they show the pilot.
Absolutely.
It is something else. They do also do the great thing where he decides, Dracula's like, man, I am missing some wolves. I had a lot of them in Transylvania. I need some. And when they show that he's ripped open the zoo, he's been to the zoo. I need some wolves. Where do I get them? Okay, this is cool. He doesn't go out in the countryside. He's in London, and they show the ripped open cage. And they cut to the zookeeper, and they cut back, and he's huge. The way they shoot him.
Yes.
Just I needed wolves. You were so beneath me. This is the way I'm going to get them, and then just chokes the guy. But his whole demeanor is, I need wolves. You can supply them. It's really sucks that you came upon me right now.
Yeah,
because-
it's you're unfortunate. Yeah, exactly.
And even better is, as we find out, he needs wolves to go menace the fiance.
Yes.
To set them like, it's not just, hey, I need some wolves to hang out and they're going to make some generic wolf sounds, which we heard in a million movies. I need this one specifically to let loose in the house and just rip stuff up.
Yeah.
And any person who I wanted to rip up, just rip it.
This is the point where we begin his attacking of Lucy, which isn't, this movie is plotted a little differently, and I kind of like really the way that the 92 one, the plot lays out a little bit better than this one. But now he starts stalking Lucy.
Well,
and
we come into it with her. That's why it feels weird. Like it feels a little disjointed, because once we see Van Helsing, something's already happened to her.
Yes.
He's already started. We just cut to the chase and go, hey, Van Helsing's here. None of this niceties of Dracula introducing himself or stalking anybody or doing all that. We cut straight to, something's gone really wrong. We need a Van Helsing to come in.
Yeah.
Although Van Helsing is not a professor or anything like this, he just seems like he's the family doctor.
He's a doctor, and he's an expert.
Although
of
he
some
does
kind or
know
another.
about he alludes that
he's
seen
still
stuff like
knowledgeable, but they don't make the thing. The thing about Van Helsing usually is like, oh, this is this eminent professor of rare diseases, and this guy just seems like he's somebody that Seward he knows, and he has him come in. It's not a big thing, I guess.
What I like about this Van Helsing, so he's played by Nigel Davenport, who was a very reliable actor. He was in A Man for All Seasons and Chariots of Fire. He's also so you think of him compared to like Peter Cushing, who most recently had been playing Van Helsing in major films, and is very different. Peter Cushing, we talked about how Peter Cushing is very athletic and very intelligent and very sort of kind to everyone. This one is sort of he's not nearly as exciting. Okay, to begin with, he's not nearly as exciting to watch as Peter Cushing. I think hands down, he's not as at home in this role, but he is very sort of he's more youthful than the one in the book, and he's definitely reliable to like go around and hammer stakes into the hearts of vampires. He's I'm not reacting to him as much as to even the Van Helsing who was in El Conde Dracula, who was Herbert Lom. He's not as interesting as Herbert Lom was. But he's certainly serviceable. There's never a moment where I was like, well, that guy doesn't fit in this.
I don't know. To me, I think I'll forget that character by next week. I mean, I feel like it's just it was just, especially when you've had Peter Cushing. It's like okay.
Yeah.
Although I do like their sleuthing part where they have to try to track down Dracula, and Dracula's been smart enough to go through all these like each company.
Isn't that wild?
Kind of cool.
So many movies skip over that part, and I always think it's one of the cooler parts in the book is them having to track down all of Dracula's hiding places and everything. So I just enjoy that they actually took the effort to adapt that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I call it the Law and Order section of this movie, where all they're doing is just going from shipping concern to shipping concern. There's a big plot about how Dracula has 10 boxes of Earth. 9 of them have gone to Carfax. 1 of them is missing. And they never do explain to us where the 10th one was.
So, So now that I think about it, and when I was watching it, do you think the actual company Carfax is run by vampires?
Yeah.
We now provide you cars, but and they would be laughing that no one has gotten it. No one's even thought about this.
Because I did, I was distracted by the fact that I every time they say Carfax, I think of Carfax. But now that you're saying that, it makes a lot of sense.
I'll tell you, I have never, ever been distracted by that because I grew up thinking about Carfax Abbey. But I will say the most exciting thing for Julia and me watching this is that Dracula's Carfax Abbey is Oakley Court. And so when they're walking around through Oakley Court and looking for his hiding place for the boxes and so forth, Julia and I were like, hey, we've actually had dinner in that space where they are. You know,
Yeah,
that's
and I know we mention that every time that shows up in a movie, but
hell yeah.
it's really fun for us.
Do they let you ceremonially burn boxes of soil?
We didn't ask permission, you know. We just
Right.
Hey, look, some soil! Quick, get a torch. Yes.
The great thing about that soil. The beautiful thing about that whole scene, by the way, is Dracula. You know, they burn Dracula's boxes, and at the time, but before Dracula has seen all that, he has his whole scene where, at this point, Lucy is dead, and Dracula is making Mina into his helpmeet by causing her to drink from his chest.
Oh
with
man, that's such an awesome supervillain scene.
It is.
He has her by the throat.
Yes.
And he says, "Hey, so you really want to do this? You really think you're going to outsmart me?"
Yeah.
And he doubles down by not choking her, showing them all that he can turn her, and just putting her head like, oh, it's so just bastardly and supervillain. And again, back to someone who is just willing to rub it into humanity's face every time.
Yeah.
But because not only does he do that, and he's turned her right in front of them.
Yeah.
I'm doing this. He then just leaves, like looks at everybody like, so I just did that. You can do nothing. And just rips out.
And that is when he has
So
that line
amazing.
that you mentioned, where he goes, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, you would pit your wits against my and me who have commanded armies, you know, you can do nothing.
Yeah.
You can do nothing.
He has a tiny bit of well played because they have kind of maneuvered him into this.
Yes.
But in general, because he's just so full of contempt, he can't admit. He's like, okay, yeah, but did you just turn a person in front of me? I'm out of here. You can do nothing. I want to see you try, because it's funny when humans. It's funny when humans do things.
It's funny when humans. Yes. Well, but then it turns out he goes back to Carfax Abbey and they burn all his boxes. And so in my mind, it's like that moment in Heat when Pacino realizes that De Niro has maneuvered Pacino and his buddies into being photographed, and he really is. It's like, you know, you realize that these are two wits that can kind of go against one another. Dracula doesn't know that they've destroyed all his boxes, so he gets back. He just had this whole thing, says, "You dare to outwit me," and now you realize, oh, Van Helsing is pretty much kind of on top of things, you know.
And part of what does it for him, and it's kind of the supervillain, or even just, you know, luckily for a lot of criminals, is his contempt for everything not a vampire clouds him into thinking that no one could possibly be as smart as him.
Yeah.
His narcissism and his worldliness of all these, you know, thousands of years of being what he is has kind of clouded him, and because he's seen it all before. Surely more people have tried to, you know, do crosses and throw, because he makes Van Helsing throw the cross down.
That's right.
By choking her. Like, hey, that works, but you're not smarter than me. So the fact that he has to admit that they kind of outwitted him, and that must just burn more than the cross.
Well, and that's the point where he has to give up. That's what's crazy, is at that point, when he's lost his boxes, he gives up and says, you know what, I'm going to try this again later. I'm going back to Europe. He no longer has Lucy, because, as we kind of skipped over, the Lucy thing didn't work out. They killed her, and he was enraged by that. So without Lucy and without his boxes, he's like, this, whatever the hell this is, this invasion of England that I'm doing is not worth it. I'm going back to Transylvania.
Right. And the Lucy thing is, it really, I love that scene. Because they go back and they, you know, kill her with a stake, as tradition dictates. And he comes back really ready to settle down with his new vampire wife, who is the reincarnation of his late wife. And when he realizes that rage where he just rips up a mausoleum.
Yes.
That's some awesome Jack Palance stuff right there.
Like I said, you actually feel so sad for him, because he comes into the mausoleum and he's like, he has this smile on his face of contentment, like, oh, I'm home. And he goes, come, my love, or whatever. And he like does his beckoning thing, and nothing happens. And then he's like, well, that's weird. And then he goes over and she's dead, and he does that howl thing. And it's like, Oh my gosh. I don't know. It's just like
Yeah.
I felt a lot of empathy for him at that moment.
Absolutely.
I don't really, because I get why people would. He's still, that's the thing with all of
He's
these.
a very
is
bad
there's-
dude.
In my mind, once you've decided, unlike most of us, that you were going to be a sociopath killer,
Mhm.
a lot of my empathy goes away.
But
Sure.
here's the thing. In this film, we don't see him be a sociopathic killer. We see him converting people to vampires. So it's like you kind of don't see it as
I don't know about that.
except for the guy. Well, there's the guy, the hotel
He left
guy,
the wolf
the
into
hotel
the
guy
house.
that he throws, the hotel guy that he throws out the window.
Well,
Also, the guy he
he
kills at the
terrorizes
zoo.
Jonathan too. Like
Yeah.
whether
But
whether
Jonathan
he-
becomes a vampire. Is the
yeah,
thing. Like
after
it's kind of
after he terrorizes him.
yeah.
He destroys a guy in the zoo, and he brings a wolf into a house to rip a guy to shreds.
Also, you're
that guy
presuming that
doesn't-
being a vampire is actually a desirable state.
No, I'm just saying it's like no, never mind. I was going to go away. That probably would be a little dangerous. But anyway, he's trying to, to make them like him is all.
I get that, and I get that,
Mm.
but
I'm not saying he's a good guy. I'm saying that I would have had less empathy for him if I had seen him I feel like he didn't really injure people as much as he turns them into vampires, or if they're in his way, he kind of gets rid of them.
But this is also why
He smashes every single person on the way out of that hotel.
Yeah.
I
Like, he
love the hotel, by the way.
like if they could have shown it, he would have karate chopped that guy in half. Like
You're totally
I
right.
I see kind of where you're coming from, but also, again, his body count is pretty huge.
I
Alright.
I will say that in Julia's defense, I do think that it is okay to try to have both empathy and understanding of evil people. Like you can condemn somebody while still trying to work out, like, okay, I see how you got to this state of being. I
Right.
see how you got to this frame of mind, even though I agree with that. I think that is, I mean, that's essentially what criminal psychology is.
Yeah.
And
Of
I think you
course.
could apply that here, because this Dracula is essentially a Nazi. He believes everybody who is not a vampire is, as Tony keeps saying, is beneath contempt. He's a vampire supremacist, and
Yeah.
and that's, you can try to, whether or not you agree with that, like you might say, like, okay, it might be better to be a vampire or whatever. You can still try to wrap your head, this is where I can say I do understand where Julia's coming from. In his mind, in Dracula's mind, he probably isn't murdering a lot of these people, turning them into him, things like him.
Well,
That's semantics. But
I agree. I agree with you wholeheartedly that we should understand, and there should be some empathy on what leads a person to become
Well,
like this. But
he's not even
a
a
lot of
person,
my
is the
empathy
thing.
goes away though when you've made a choice to murder and destroy.
But the thing is, I don't think of him as a person. I think of him as a monster. So it's more like
Sure.
feeling sad for a rabid dog that gets put down. Where you're like, well, that dog just killed a bunch of whatever else's,
So
and he
Dracula
needed
is
to be
Old
put down.
Yeller. Okay.
But
Well, yeah.
no, he's
I mean,
not old. Well, yeah, old.
or
He's not even
Kong.
Old Yeller.
Remember,
But
Kong doesn't
yes.
care about the people that he stomps on while he's running
Right.
through the streets.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that. Yeah.
But one of the complicated things is that, look, vampirism is a very it's a problematic and malleable metaphor where, and in movies even, it'll change from scene to scene. Like, what exactly does it mean? Or
Sure.
is it a stand-in for sociopaths? Is it a stand-in for sexual predators? Is it a stand-in for just a different and misunderstood religion? And this movie goes
Or the
back and
plague.
forth. Yes, right. Yeah, the plague. And it's funny to think that if it's a cult thing, like or graduating to a different state of being, then it's fascinating that Dracula would be cruel to you and mean to you until such time as you graduate, and then he's nice to you. So maybe he would be nice to vampire Harker, but mean to human Harker.
I don't think so.
He's not that nice to the bride.
Right. I should point out, by the way, that according to the television horrors of Dan Curtis, this just in, it's not Matheson. It was Curtis who introduced the flashback.
Yeah,
motions.
that's what I said. That's what Curtis said in the video we were watching.
Yeah, but
he himself said.
But but directors say all kinds of things. But but the fact that apparently those things were not in Matheson's original script leads me to believe that Curtis was telling the truth when he says, "Yeah, that stuff was my idea." So
all right then.
I know that sounded horrible, but truly, everybody takes credit for the good stuff, no matter what it is, no matter what movie it is.
Well, and Jason, being a writer, always gets irritated when anybody gives actors credit for lines. So he's like, yeah, whatever. Sure, you did.
You just never know. It's just so easy for people to remember things wrong too, and go, "Oh yeah, that was my idea. I came up with that one day, and I said, what if Dracula thought this lady was reincarnated?" It's like the story of Indiana Jones cutting short the fight because Harrison Ford, it was his idea because he was sick that day, and I just have never believed that, but it's a story that will never die. I don't know what's the truth. Maybe one of the listeners will let us know.
So we do go on to Europe.
Yes. We now run back to Transylvania, as always. And they've got Mina as a remote viewer of Dracula because Van Helsing is savvy enough to know that after she drank of his blood, she is psychically connected to him. It's pretty rad. I mean, I like this idea.
Yeah, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's neat. It would lead you to believe, in fact, that if he were even like if Van Helsing were a Batman player, coming up with really complicated plots, he might deliberately maneuver somebody into this situation so he could have a remote Dracula viewer. They follow Dracula back to Transylvania, and it goes really fast after that. I mean, they kill the brides. They are attacked by vampire Harker, which is very. All of this action, I gotta say, there's not much to talk about, but it's really fast and really vigorous. I mean, Curtis is keeping up a really fast pace, and his actors all are like extremely hopped up and ready to fight and leap and stuff. And they managed to corner Dracula and weaken him with sunlight, just like in the 1957 Dracula. And that's sort of the end. I mean, they spear him, but he's not eaten up by sunlight the way that he was in the Christopher movie.
Well,
he does vomit up a bunch of blood, though.
Yeah, he does.
He does get eaten by sunlight. He just doesn't get exploded. You're talking about? Wait, I'm sorry.
Weakened by the sunlight.
Yeah, he gets weakened by the sunlight. Now, here's my question, and I kind of answered it for myself already early when we were watching it. But why would Dracula have a house with a bunch of windows? Like, why not just not have the windows? Like, board them up or something. And the only thought I can have is maybe he wants
your coffin in there at the very least.
Right, but the only thought I had was maybe at night he wants to be able to have fresh air or go in and out the windows. I don't know. But I'm like, that seemed like a foolish idea to just have some curtains.
It could also be, again, narcissism. He wants to keep up apperances. Like, why should I change my castle to reflect this vampirism when my castle's perfectly fine? I designed it when I was human. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but you can see somebody who was just that narcissistic. Plus,
yes.
But yeah, maybe don't put your coffin there. That's
right.
No, I could see somebody thinking in those terms of the castle is the castle. Why? Plus, it would be weird if I boarded up the windows or bricked them up or however. Then you're a prisoner to yourself, as opposed to being a vampire and being awesome.
Yeah, you're right. So it's an excellent point. It does feel like a perfectly wonderful castle. I mean, unlike the 1931 one where huge chunks of wall are missing and it's it really does feel very oppressive. This one feels like he's the nobleman just around here, and yeah, I agree, it's arrogance. Hey, answer me a question about this Dracula. Forgive me if this sounds stupid, but what does a vampire lord like Dracula do like all night? I mean, other than like we all have to eat, right? So he eats. But what does he do? Does he read philosophy? I'm not being sarcastic. I mean, like, what does he do with his time?
if you're in if you're in the underworld franchise, you just sit around and laugh at people who are actually getting shit done, which I've always hated. I've always hated that scene where you have you have a team of people going out and doing things, and you have a ton of vampires who just sit around and play cards and then go, ha, look, people who work. Oh, so frustrating. But I think he reads philosophy. I think it would be great because when Harker comes in, even though he hates humanity, he still wants that touchstone. So he does keep him up all night, and they talk about just whatever. They don't really go into it, but
history. They talk about history a lot.
Yeah. And so I guarantee you, though, if they talk about history, there's a lot of so a Dracula guy, right? Vlad, pretty cool. Did you know this one story? Have you heard of this other story? It just turned. Oh, back in the day, there was this guy. You could just picture him.
They even show it.
I can imagine Dracula playing organ a lot.
Yes.
Possibly, or I'm sure he knows a lot of instruments. I think it'd be cool if while he was wandering, he ate one person and just hung out around the campfire talking to somebody, some random, and it'll be like one of those stories. They'll never believe that they spent all night talking to Dracula.
That's fascinating. You're thinking of Dracula as Henry V. That's yeah.
I have a question related to this as far as the peasants, and I can't believe I've never thought about this until watching this version. But at the very, very, very beginning of this version of Dracula, and basically every version of Dracula, when Jonathan Harker is in the carriage and he's going to the Borgo Pass, and he's like, okay, drop me off here, I have to meet the coach for Castle Dracula, and everybody kind of is like, oh, you should not go to Castle Dracula. They don't say it strongly enough, but they're kind of like, yeah, don't go to Castle Dracula. Why doesn't the driver just keep on? Why do they give him the choice at all?
My view on it is no one wants to let somebody do the thing, but they're all afraid if they don't that Dracula will find out.
Yeah.
And that'll be it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because he's been the ruler. Also, if you go with the fact that it is, Vlad, then he is a kind of a hero, but they're under the rule of this terrible, he keeps us safe, but then it's a mobster kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where, hey, I guess people don't mess with us as much, but I still got to pay this extortion, or I still have to, if so-and-so comes into my restaurant, I can't ask them to pay. If they choose to pay, cool. And so it's kind of one of those things where no one actually wants to not do Dracula's bidding, but they will try to nudge and wink. Hey, that's probably not the best thing.
Yeah.
But they can't outright say it.
Your theory is actually borne out by the novel for sure. There's a letter that Dracula has written to the innkeeper that Harker stays with that says this guy is going to be traveling through. He is an Englishman, so he is adventurous, which is Bram Stoker being kind to his audience, and so he is under my protection, so take the best of care of him, which is nobody's idea of a hint. That's
again, it's very mobster, old school, old way of doing things. You would not like it if something happens to this person.
Right.
It would be in your best interest if he arrives safely.
Yeah.
And by that, I mean the whole village. I will not destroy all of you at a whim. You can all read between the lines on exactly what I'm saying by, please keep him safe. That would be nice.
Yes. There's this wonderful
so much
moment.
more menace between the words than what's actually written.
Hey, did we do Scars of Dracula? Forgive me for asking. I was trying to remember.
I never remember, and I don't apologize.
The only reason I mention it, there's this moment in Scars of Dracula, which is nobody's idea of a good movie, but I like a lot of things about Scars of Dracula, and one of them is that Dracula completely goes ballistic on a town after they tick him off, and I just thought that was fabulous.
I mean, that would make interesting. Those kind of folklore things are great when you go, hey, so we knew about a place 2 towns over.
Right.
When Dracula wrote them a letter, they didn't do it. And is that even a town anymore? Well, not now. It hasn't been a town for 20 years. And don't go there either.
Right.
Which would, of course, in that movie lead to somebody going there and going, "Holy crap!" and probably being attacked by vampires or some other crazy mutants that he had created. If it was, especially if it was like you can picture that in like a Vampire Hunter D novel.
Yes,
where you hear
right.
tales of a town where they pissed off the local vampire, and now that's just erased, except for whatever crazy creatures he left behind. Because that's his way of salting the earth, basically.
Wow, your point that it's like a Vampire Hunter, it totally is. You could see them going by a dead town and knowing that the vampire they're interested in completely wiped out this town in the past, and so that ups the stakes. This movie, by the way,
write that since I don't. It's sort of kind of been in Vampire Hunter D, but now
do it, man.
I guess if
for
we
sure.
get around to making a vampire thing, let's do that. We just gotta hope that people again who are listening to this aren't like writing notes, and then a year from now we see some.
Yeah, I would hope, actually. To be honest with you, if I don't get around to it, I want somebody else to. So the movie ends. They fade up to the painting of this movie's version of Vlad the Impaler, and they have a little historical coda that's mostly nonsense, and that's fine. I mean, all you can really take away from it is there's a historical guy named Dracula. It's all sort of mixed up, but that's okay.
Say more.
With his very fawning late wife, as if it's kind of like a van art.
Yes.
But
that would be Jason. Awesome if he had lived and there's like a Chevy van, but it's got that painting on the side.
It's very much it does definitely belong in a Chevy van. It looks nothing like the only, we don't have paintings of what we have. Well, no, I apologize. There are paintings of Dracula, but they are busts. I mean, they're portraits. Right. And then we have woodcuts, but this kind of this is like a Frank Frazetta, fantasy thing. And that's
how crazy would it be if you were such a horror fan that of all the like werewolves and vampires and everything like that your particular boogie van just had the Jack Palance painting?
Hell yeah. I would have the Jack Palance thing on one side, and on the other side you'd have that ridiculous painting that they have in The Omen, which looked like nothing.
Did you on the back also just have Dorian Gray? Just hedge all your bets, but like Dorian Gray as van art. That would be.
So,
Jason, you were saying though, at the end, when they had the little epilogue, the little postscript thing, you said that it was historically inaccurate. I'm wondering if you remember what it was.
It's sort of pedantic to even care about the difference, but it says that the peasants called him Dracula because that meant the devil or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but that's not true at all. Dracula was called Dracula because he was the principal member of the Order of the Dragon, which was what his father was a part of, and he was called Dracula, and so this guy's Dracula, which is son of, and it's because he was called Dracula because he's a good Catholic. That's why he's a part of the Order of the Dragon, and he's a principal fighter for the Pope, and it has nothing to do with it. Just the thing at the end of this.
It's really because he's full of Dracula love. And you too can, if you have the right look.
And mind you, I don't want people to feel like I'm being like I'm like misrepresenting the Catholic Church of the 15th century. This is a long time ago, so I'm not saying anything about the church now. I'm talking about then. So yes, and you fight with the principalities that you have, I suppose.
That and Dracula.
So, yeah.
Put that out there. That sounds like something that would be in like the Dracula, was it 72 AD or 73 AD?
Yes, Dracula 72 AD. Yeah. Man, we got to watch
Dracula
that one too.
Everybody.
How can we not have done all of these different Hammer Draculas or Dracula? We still haven't talked about Louis Jourdan. We still haven't talked about there's bound to be other. I mean, we did do Count Dracula, thank goodness. Although we did it a number of years ago now. So, if you're interested, you should go back and listen to that.
The fact that you're the host and we haven't done 72 AD, I don't even know how we failed. But
I try super hard not to bring my own proclivities into all this, although I fail like crazy.
I thought the whole podcast was your proclivities.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
just
no.
Whose idea was this thing?
Oh, okay.
Look inside yourself for your own Dracula, Jason. I don't know.
Look in yourself. That's like a line from the Sounds of the Lambs. You're really on tonight. That's pretty great. Or back to Hannibal Lecter. Yes, because it was whatever, your self-storage. Okay. Well, that brings us to the end. We have to talk about our final
Oh, you sound
thoughts
so
about
sad.
Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Sorry, honey.
This is it's quite all right. So what order did we go in? I think it was Drew, Julia,
me.
Tony. Yeah. So Mr. Drew, I know golly, we've been talking for a long time about this movie.
Have
What are your
we?
thoughts? I think we have. It feels like it. And yeah, my goodness, it's like an hour and 45 minutes, which is pretty good. So final thoughts. We may have missed something, or just sum up whatever you like. Bram Stoker's Dracula.
First of all, this is Dan Curtis's Dracula, just like how the 92 is Coppola's Dracula. I dislike it immensely when movies call themselves such and such, such and such, because it's not the fucking book. And
yeah,
if I wanted Bram Stoker's Dracula, I have the book on my bookshelf. I could just go read it. However, Dan Curtis's Dracula is a very enjoyable adaptation. I don't know why this version is different. My viewing of this version this time was different because I've been lukewarm to it in the past. But again, maybe it's just the print on Prime is just so much better because like I every other time I've seen this movie, it's been on a very murky VHS tape. So this is almost like seeing a completely different movie with how cleaned up the version on Prime is. But I really enjoyed watching it this time, and it's a good Halloween time watch. You know, I because I watch horror and sci-fi all year round, I always kind of have to like quantify what my fall viewing is going to be, and I think it's always best to do stuff with like the classic horror characters for October, and this is a good Dracula adaptation if you've never seen it. So I highly recommend it. I thought this was I was glad I gave this another chance.
That's fabulous. Julia, go ahead.
Well, so like I said, I think that Jack Palance really saves this film from being just another Dracula movie, because he's so interesting. The choices he makes are so interesting. I wasn't particularly impressed with any of the females in this story, and I mean, they're okay. They're just they're just what they are. And the sets are the usual lovely sets. There's nothing super special because again, we've seen some of these places before, but it's not the hammerscape that that we're used to, I think. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else that we didn't really touch on. Music's not memorable if there's any music. So it's just kind of like I say, it's just kind of a one of these period pieces about Dracula that would have kind of been completely forgettable to me if it weren't for Jack Palance. He really saves it. He's amazing.
Wonderful. Mr. Tony.
Oh yeah, I really dig on this. I agree that perhaps Palance was an unlikely Dracula, but the fact that he chose to make the choices he did in his demeanor and how he presents it makes me super happy. I really like it. And there's a lot of great stuff, and there's some, and like Drew pointed out, there are some elevated stuff in here that we haven't seen previously from Curtis, and especially that Demeter scene. It's so well framed. There's just so many really good frames, and it avoids kind of the I guess he still does the stupid soft focus thing, and that's how we on TV at the time know when you're doing a flashback. That's more of a trope of like that's just how it was done at the time. But yeah, I don't need much of an excuse to watch this one. I wish that some parts were expanded more here and there, but that's a kind of disingenuous because you're judging on I wish that the movie was more like I wish the movie was. Doesn't really.
Wow, that's well said. That's really well said.
But yeah, I dig on it.
I really love this, and I've so much enjoyed talking about this. I do. My one problem with it is it's too bright. I'm curious what would happen if, I was really annoyed when John Badham took the bright yellow and red colors of his 1979 Dracula and turned them all blue, which was super strange. But I would love it if somebody would do a color correction on this just to make it a lot murkier. Now, Drew, am I wrong about that? Because you said you've seen murkier versions of this and you like better this brighter version.
I think that this version looks a lot better. I think this is probably how this movie was intended to look.
That's for sure.
I think that the versions that I am used to, and probably you're used to, are VHS copies, which are pretty worn out, and that gives, look, if you like that aesthetically, I'm not going to say that that's wrong, but that's probably not what the filmmaker intended. I think this is, and certainly the sound is so much better. Like I said, there was stuff about Jack Palance's performance that I just getting on those versions. So I think this is the version you should watch. I would not recommend someone, especially someone younger than us, that it would have no nostalgic thoughts to the movie. I wouldn't recommend like a younger person watching, a version that was not the cleaned up version, because I think they would lose a lot of how cinematic this movie is. It really looks a lot better than what you would think a TV movie would look.
Yeah, that's true. And it did play, as always, American producers were taking their TV movies and selling them into theaters overseas. So, if you were overseas, you might have gotten this as a movie that just opened on a random Friday night. Thank you. Well, let's do our endorsements. I'm really curious what people have been up to in the past week. So, Drew, you can start us. What's on your mind?
Well, my real endorsement actually ties quite into everything that we're talking about, but I'll get that in a second. Self-servingly, the new issue of the Halloween Man ongoing came out this week on Comixology. That's Halloween Man 18, with pencils by my newfound buddy Jason Wilson. It looks really great. So if you have not gone on Comixology to read that yet, I'm really, really happy with how this issue turns out as far as like the artwork goes. And also I think it has an ending that a lot of people who watch the news right now might find cathartic. And I'm just gonna leave it at that. So my real endorsement, my non-self-serving endorsement, is actually a adaptation of Dracula that is being staged currently at the Zach Theater here in Austin, Texas. My wife took me to see it last Wednesday as a early birthday present, and I just loved it. I think it's so creative, and the thing that they do with it that make it different than a lot of the other Dracula adaptations is there is no Van Helsing in this version. They give all of Van Helsing's sleuthing and vampire hunting to Mina, and sort of making it a feminist retelling of Dracula. While it's observant of a lot of the tropes that we associate with Dracula movies and Dracula fiction, that makes the dynamic between Mina and Dracula very different, because she is his intended thrall, but also his nemesis. And I just thought it was a very interesting take on it. Also, they have a woman playing Renfield, and she is terrific. Like one of the better Renfields I can think of on memory. And finally, as interest of people in this, who listen to this podcast, the choices they make with the way the costumes and everything are done, they make all the costumes super vibrant to sort of mimic the look of a Hammer movie. Like they give it almost the Technicolor look.
That's pretty cool.
it's a very cool version of Dracula. Like, and that's it. Just goes to show you, just when you think everything can be done with this character, someone will do another twist on it. And I just really enjoyed it. And it plays at the Zach Theater through November 3rd. So if you're looking for some Halloween time fun to get into, if you live in our great state's capital, I highly recommend it.
That's wonderful. Julia, what do you have for us this week?
I binge watched the first season of The Politician and thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. It's got an amazing cast. It's the main young people are Ben Platt, Zoe Deutsch, Lucy Boynton. I forget the other person's name. And then you've got the adults. The parents are Bob Balaban and Gwyneth Paltrow. And then you've got Jessica Lange in there. And then and Dylan McDermott and January Jones. I mean, it's really great cast. And so you have the first part of the season is in high school, and it's a young man, Ben Platt, wanting to become the student body president because he wants to become president of the United States, and this is his first, like, his next step. And then he needs to get into Harvard and all these things. He's got all these plans. And so various things happen and along that path. And then the last few episodes, or last couple of episodes, take us into the next phase of his life. So really, I think this should have probably been the next season, honestly. But it's delightful to have those episodes because all of a sudden you have the next cast of brilliant people, which is Bette Midler and Judith Light. I was having trouble coming up with Judith Light's name for a minute. Bette Midler and Judith Light show up, and now Ben Platt is going to run against Judith Light. And so it's just a really fun and just refreshing and strange show. I never knew. I usually pride myself in kind of knowing where stories are going, but I never knew where the story was going. So absolutely check it out if you get the chance. And it was a nice kind of upbeat thing to watch as opposed to the two movies I saw this weekend, which were both really depressing. So I watched the Joker and Judy with Jason, and both of those were just really depressing movies. They're good, but they have their things that are good. But this was just really fun.
By the way, the Joker and Judy double feature this is just a thing. Now that we do the AMC A list, it's so cool to like book two movies in a row and then just run like you're 12 years old and just going from one movie to the next. It was really neat. So a few weeks ago, I went to Downton Abbey and then Rambo, and then this week it was Judy. And then
That's quite a spread.
Well, he went to Rambo, and what did I go to after Downton Abbey? I'm forgetting.
Clearly not as memorable as Rambo.
No. I know. Yeah, it wasn't. It was the Matthew McConaughey movie. I mean, I'm sorry, the Brad Pitt movie. The space.
Ad Astra.
Ad Astra.
Yeah. Or as Tony called it, Sad Astra.
Ad Astra was not as memorable as Rambo.
You gotta pronounce it right. Sad Dadstra.
Sad Dadstra. Yeah, there you go.
That's truly the crux.
Tony, right. What about you? What do you have to endorse?
I'm gonna endorse some things that are out and then some things that are coming out that I'm still in Fantastic Fest mode, and I hope to I need to do some write-ups. It's been kind of crazy coming back and being in full-on production at my day job. But right now you can stream Bliss, which I will say that I didn't see, but I saw something else, and all of my friends talking about Bliss made me sad that I didn't see this movie. It's pretty cool, evidently. Also coming out in November, I Lost My Body, which is the story of a disembodied hand trying to get back to its owner. It sounds way more abstract. It's a pretty beautiful love story. It's animated. It's amazing. That's coming out in November. And also there's a great documentary that I have to track down exactly when you'll be able to see it, when everybody will be able to see it. But Memory, The Origins of Alien, which if anybody saw 7852 and like that, I know we talked about it before, at least in passing, which deals with the shower scene from Psycho. And the filmmakers have a really kind of cool way of finding a focal point for discussing a movie or horror. And it sounds like a movie just about the shower scene for Psycho would, like, how much can you talk about it? But the way they do it is really cool. And they bring that kind of thing into Memory, the Origins of Alien. And they also talk, they have clips of Dan O'Bannon. They talk about it to his widow. And it's really a fascinating documentary. So hopefully, and there'll hopefully be more. There's also a really interesting movie out right now on Netflix that came out. I still need to see In the Tall Grass, which I've heard is good. But there is one called In the Shadow of the Moon. And I thought it was really cool that Netflix brought a bunch of movies to show on the big screen. And I wish they would do that more often, like do limited runs. They're doing Dolomite Is My Name, which I highly recommend when that comes out. Like, go see that. It's great. There's a great return to form from Eddie Murphy. But In the Shadow of the Moon, I think you can check out now. And it's got a lot of really cool elements to it. So those are my recommendations.
That is really, really fabulous. I have nothing to add other than, I did see Judy, and I'm just really enjoying seeing some of these movies that traditionally I would have waited for VOD to see, except for that they, since I'm doing a subscription thing, it makes it marginally less costly to go see any particular movie. And so Renee Zellweger plays Judy Garland, and it's quite a transformation. You really do believe that she's Judy Garland. I mean, that's the amazing thing. And she plays Judy Garland as this extraordinarily fragile person who is 47 years old, but
she dies.
Right. When she dies, she's 47 years old.
She's younger than that in a lot of it, but yeah.
But not by much. I mean, she only dies like 6 months after the end of the movie. That's a spoiler, but it's Judy Garland we're talking about. And she seems so ravaged by time and her substance abuse issues that she's a scarecrow who might be 80 years old or 90 years old. When she's not dancing, she's hunched and she's weak, and it's an amazing performance. So that was really cool. I got one more thing I want to mention, and this is not an endorsement so much as it's something that blew my mind that I had no idea about. So I'm watching The Addams Family, and Morticia says in passing, because they bring up the Fifth Amendment, and Gomez goes, "What's the Fifth Amendment?" And she goes, "Don't you know you went to law school?" And he goes, "Yeah, but I skipped that day." And let's assume that you could get through law school without learning what the Fifth Amendment was. Gomez Addams went to law school? That blew my mind.
I didn't realize that.
No, never in my life.
And first of all, are you talking about the new Addams Family?
No,
movie?
I'm talking about the real one with
the real one
from the 60s.
You mean the TV show?
John Astin, yes. Talking about John Astin.
He is no more the real Gomez Addams than anything else. First of all, unless we're talking about the Charles Addams comic strip.
Indeed,
but
I'm teasing. But Gomez Addams is a lawyer. I never had any idea.
He doesn't practice much because he has his family money.
Yeah, no, I get it. He's a millionaire industrialist like Bruce Wayne. I'm just thinking,
well, he's not even a millionaire industrialist. He just has a lot of money for some such shit because he's an Addams.
It's fascinating. I mean, like what that means.
You might notice like none of the Addamses seem they work, Jason. Like they're just sort of there. Which is kind of a great life when you think about it.
Sounds magnificent. I was just thinking, clearly Mr. Addams has his investments, so we might say he's an investor. But whatever, he's just a rich dude. But that means that someone out there in that universe went to law school with Mr. Addams. And what a strange person to like share a study hall with that would be. Just imagine what those years would have been like. Those 3 golden years.
There's fan fiction for you to write there. Addams Family fan fiction. How this fell upon you. I don't know how we got to this point, but
an Addams Family paper chase sounds amazing.
Yeah. See, this is like, I've always wanted to write about Herman Munster's service during World War II. So
No kidding.
perhaps perhaps we can just create the Kooky family cinematic universe.
Oh my
and
gosh.
um,
You're
I would
right.
take
You
that,
meant
or I would also love to write a Creature Commandos
Yes.
series or
well,
movie.
you know, the fact that Herman Munster is a World War II vet does seem very Creature Commandos.
I
They
think
do.
that perhaps
They mention it in the Monsters because there's a whole thing where he's trying to lose weight because he's got to meet up with his buddies from World War II or Korea. It's unclear to me if he was in World War II.
I just want to say World War II because I want to imagine Herman Munster clubbing Nazis in the face with his giant Herman Munster hands. Which
lots of accidental death where he's like,
which by the way, actually, I feel like I would be doing a disservice, even though I would say the show is far from perfect. I'm jumping on Jason, but the new Creep Show has wonderful special effects that are almost entirely practical. I again, far from perfect. But the second episode has werewolves versus Nazis. You're welcome.
Okay, that sounds fabulous. And looking at Fred Gwynn's life, Fred Gwynn served in the Navy during World War II, so we can presume that Herman is the same age
Herman
as
is
Fred.
a vet. Herman kicked Nazi ass.
Yep, very good. All right. This has been the Castle of Horror. I'm really thankful that
holy crap, that would mean that possibly Herman Munster fought in Germany against other Frankenstein monsters.
I think truly that's a wonderful.
Can I write?
No one can stop you.
More
I don't
fan
know
fiction
why
to write.
I mean, they have a license to do this.
Well,
I
all
mean,
you got to do, Mr. Tony, first of all, you could write it as a hyped up fanfic and just subtly change the names, Kim Newman style, you know?
Yeah,
like
Kim Newman a lot of the times doesn't even change the names. He has like the Addams Family in one of his books, and they're just the Addams Family.
It's wild.
Yeah. How does he get away with?
And the latest one, he has Popeye.
He has what?
And the latest one, he has Popeye.
I mean, you can get away with a lot if it's not your main character in the book because nobody cares. Not because you have a license, but just because nobody cares. It's different if it's the main character of the book, truly. But because then you're going to be putting it on the cover and yada yada. But,
so I take it you've gone down the Anno Dracula rabbit hole.
No, I'm just well aware of it, and I've been meaning to read them, and I just haven't read them yet. I still feel very embarrassed about that. So, anyway, perhaps I have to finish a short story, and then maybe I'll get a chance to do some reading. We got a vacation coming up. I'll definitely bring them with. So, all right. For those of you still listening, thank you very much. Come to the Facebook page. Let us know what you think. Let us know your thoughts about your favorite Dracula. How does Jack Palance measure up? And definitely go listen to our earlier episodes about Dracula for sure. I need to do a playlist of them on YouTube of just all the Dracula episodes. And everybody have a wonderful week and be excellent to one another. Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.